Mark, please feel free to chime in throughout the webinar if you see anything that should be expanded on or clarified in any way. I think it's important for us to just acknowledge why we are here tonight. We are in the midst of a pandemic and we have been asked to stay home in order to stop the spread of the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, otherwise known as COVID-19. So in this pandemic, governments are relying primarily on voluntary social distancing, like staying at home, but they also include, school closures and stay-at-home orders in preference to more mandatory movement restrictions. So for tonight, this webinar, we'll be discussing what is a stay-at-home order and why are public health authorities imposing them, followed by a review of the most recent or most current stay-at-home orders provided by the Colorado Governor, Jared Polis, and some of the more populous jurisdictions in our state, such as Denver, Aurora, Colorado Springs, and so forth. And to look how these orders may be impacting your day-to-day movement, such as going to, the grocery store, going to work, so on. And then as also looking at how these local governments and what is their level of response when it comes to enforcing these orders. Finally, we'll look at some resources that we hope may be helpful to assist in answering some of the questions you might have related to some of these orders. So certainly there are a lot of questions regarding civil rights during the pandemic, including access to healthcare, workers' rights, what it means for surveillance and privacy, just to name a few. But for purposes of tonight, we really will be kind of sticking to the stay-at-home orders and its impact on individuals' ability to move freely about within the public sphere. So I do want to note this webinar is intended to be a resource. I am not an attorney and will not be providing legal advice. And even if I was, I still probably wouldn't be providing legal advice, as we just understand that each individual situation is different, that provides its own individual facts and kind of really requires thoughtful analysis of what's going on, because it does produce different outcomes and from that. So before we kind of get into it, I think it's important for us to kind of lay the groundwork in terms of what we see happening at this time. So on March 5th, the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE, their laboratory confirmed the first presumptive COVID-19 test result in Colorado, and that there was evidence of community spread throughout the state. And from then, on March 11th, the governor issued Executive Order D 2020-003. And essentially, this was basically issuing a disaster emergency and requesting President Trump declare a major disaster emergency for the state of Colorado. Then on March 18th, the governor issued a 2020-07 order, which basically closed public schools, public and private schools, with the thinking that, children kind of serve as this vector for the disease and spreading the disease to older individuals and folks with underlying conditions who are more likely to experience more severe symptoms of COVID-19. So by March 25th, the governor had issued multiple executive orders ranging from the closure of ski resorts, suspension of elective and non-essential surgeries, to requesting that employers decrease their workforce by 50%. And this decision was really made based off of public health experts and their claims that COVID-19 was still spreading through close contact between people when, someone was coughing or sneezing. And so the public health experts were really recommending social distancing and maintaining a physical distance as a way to slow the spread of disease. And so the decision was made by the governor to first issue 2020-017 for Coloradoans to stay at home. What is probably kind of, the most important aspect of this order is that the governor is directing CDPHE to define the parameters and exemptions of what it means to stay at home. And then also kind of in the midst of this, various local jurisdictions around Colorado, such as Denver, Arapahoe, and Larimer counties were taking similar guidance from their county public authorities and measures to kind of put measures in place for their jurisdictions to help stop the spread of disease. So since then, based off of the data that CDPHE is receiving on the spread of coronavirus, the governor and local municipalities have been amending or extending these stay-at-home orders. As we know, the governor has extended its order until April 26th, and Denver has extended its order until April 30th. And we'll talk a little bit later on in the webinar as to what's going on with the differences in timelines. So of course, if you have free time on your hands and you want a bit of light reading, then you can visit the governor's website, where it has all of the executive orders that have been issued since then. So, I guess that kind of goes into, well, what is, a stay-at-home order and what's the purpose of it? And the purpose of it is, to minimize the contact between residents and to minimize that exposure to the public to contamination, whether it be folks who may be sick or contaminated surfaces, as we know that the virus, kind of stays alive on surfaces that we touch throughout the day. And the rationale behind these orders is by staying home, we can maximize the number of people that we're isolating in place and reduce the proximity of people in spaces where disease is likely to spread. But also at the same time, making sure that we are enabling services, businesses, and travel that is necessary to protect the public health. How do we think that these orders are helping the public? Well, at this stage, it's an emergency, and it's critical to slow that transmission as much as possible to protect the most vulnerable populations and to prevent Colorado's healthcare system from being overwhelmed. So, if we are to kind of think about how does the governor justify imposing these executive orders requiring for us to stay at home? Well, the powers, the Colorado emergency powers, live in a few places. We can first look at the Colorado Constitution under Article 4, Section 2. So Article 4 really covers the executive branch of our state government. And there's basically one line under Section 2, and that declares that the supreme executive power of the state shall be vested in the governor, who shall take care of the laws that are faithfully executed. And so it's kind of that broad umbrella to then implement other statutes to kind of really define what that means. And so, we can also look at the Colorado Disaster Emergency Act, which is in state statute. And pretty much it outlines the emergency conditions such as pandemic influenza and produce procedures and the government's authority for managing local state disasters and emergencies. And it's very important to note that this power is vested with the office of the governor and not the governor as an individual. And so the purposes of the statutes is to assist the public in protecting the public safety and to protect communities from damage, loss of life, loss of property, and to take action to prepare and respond against current and future risks. And just so you know that under the Colorado Disaster Emergency Act, pandemic influenza is defined as a widespread epidemic of influenza caused by a highly virulent strain, which is what we understand COVID-19 to be. The CDPHE also has powers vested in its department through state statute to protect the public health. And so forth, they have like powers to say close theaters, schools, and other public places and justify implementing social distance measures such as the kind of 6 feet from the next person that we've kind of come to know in order to protect public health. So, what we know, based off of that is that we have the executive orders declaring a state of emergency, the original stay-at-home orders, order that was issued under 2020-017, and then the extension of that stay-at-home order based off of data that we are getting in terms of the rate and spread of coronavirus. And then on the other side of that, since we know that the governor has given powers to CDPHE, there are public health orders that further define what it means to stay at home, what those social distancing requirements look like, the necessary activities and critical businesses that are defined, which we'll talk a bit about later, and then what does closing certain businesses look like outside of that. And of course at the bottom is the source in terms of if you want that extensive list. I want to note that we will probably be putting these slides up on our webpage and all of the resources and links that are associated with it. So if I go through it, just know that we plan on putting it up on our website, and we'll give you the link to our webpage later on tonight. So some thoughts. I think it's worth expressing that as the ACLU, we have yet to experience a time in our history where a pandemic of this scale has led the government to having such a compelling interest in placing parameters on our ability to move freely about in society in the name of public health. And so I think in less situations, which we've definitely seen, I don't think we would condone such actions, but we do acknowledge that in times like this, there may be situations in which it is justified. So when we're looking at movement restrictions that are imposed by the government, like the stay-at-home orders that have been issued, there's a few things we want to make sure is happening to ensure that there isn't a complete violation of our civil liberties. So some things for us to consider. One is that any government restrictions on liberty, such as stay-at-home orders that restrict the population's movement, must be scientifically justified, and the least restrictive measures are available to protect the public health. Second is that any government restrictions on liberty must continually be reevaluated to ensure that it's still justified in the light of scientific evidence and as conditions are evolving. So any mandatory measures should be assessed in short intervals so that we can ensure that it remains justified and that there are no other less restrictions that might be available that can produce the same effect as medical and scientific consensus changes. And then lastly, we just want to make sure that any stay-at-home order must not arbitrarily impose or be implemented in such a manner that discriminates against individuals who belong to a protected class, so such as national origin. So, basically saying, people who come from country A, must stay inside, but the rest of society can go about their way. That would be very arbitrarily based on that. So we can look at kind of the first executive order that was issued. And we'll look at the one that is the most recent. And so what are we required to do under this order? All individuals living in Colorado are ordered to stay at home whenever possible. Individuals that are living in a shared outdoor space are also expected to comply with the social distancing requirements, and that people may only leave their residences to perform like the necessary activities, critical government functions, and so forth. And kind of as we had mentioned a little earlier, the social distancing requirements is that people, must, maintain at least 6 foot distance from other individuals, wash their hands with soap or use hand sanitizer, sneeze in like their elbow and not their hands, kind of some of those measures that, they're asking people to do to stop the spread. So 2020-024 is the most recent order, and essentially this is extending the first one that we showed, 2020-017. And so basically what this does is it extends the order from April 11th to April 26th. And so, again, here we have that the governor is directing the the governor is directing the ED of the CDPHE to issue public health orders that are consistent with the executive order and allows and permits local public health authorities to issue more proactive public health measures. So, under this executive order, like any stay-at-home measures that have been issued by local jurisdictions still kind of remain in effect. So based off of this, and based off of kind of the guidelines that we mentioned earlier, what do we want to, ask and see? How does Colorado's executive order size up in terms of reviewing the issues that we might be concerned about? So is it scientifically justified? When we're reviewing the major stay-at-home orders that are being issued by the state and local municipalities, what we see is that each of them are outlining and providing findings about the rate of spread of COVID-19 to justify the order and how the illness is being transmitted, symptoms, and the window of incubation, and the associated health risks. So they are providing the scientific basis for putting the order. So we see that there. Continually reevaluating based off of scientific evidence and evolving conditions? So since March 16th, CDPHE has updated their public health orders as the rate of infection has evolved. So using this data available, CDPHE is extended these orders and business measures as that data is coming in. Are the stay-at-home orders applied to the general public, and are they, discriminating against individuals of a protected class? We have not seen anything in these public health orders that indicate that particular communities are being targeted. These orders are being applied to all Coloradoans, so it appears that it passed that issue. And then our stay-at-home orders allowing access to food, medical supplies, and other basic necessities. Yes, it appears like these orders are carving out the exemptions for necessary activities and travel, and not only permitting essential businesses to stay open, but also the businesses and services that support the functions of the essential businesses so that they can remain open and help the public during this time. So if we were to look at some of the local stay-at-home orders, Denver has issued and amended a number of public health orders, starting with its declaration of a local disaster emergency. And so Denver and other counties, they have the authority to declare such an emergency under Colorado revised statute Title 24, 33.5-709. And basically the effect is that they're able to declare a local disaster emergency, so that way they can activate a response and ensuring that they can put plans in place in order to further the assistance in and the aid of their residents that are within the jurisdiction. So what we see from the stay-at-home orders is that they too are requiring residents to stay home and businesses to implement work from home policies to the greatest extent possible. It does not impose a curfew nor require documentation for essential businesses, nor are they performing checks to see if people are traveling on essential businesses. And then, of course, as we note, kind of from a little bit of a debacle, is that liquor stores and recreation marijuana stores can remain open as long as they are practicing those extreme physical distancing measures, such as the 6-foot spacing between individuals. So as for Aurora, Boulder, and Colorado Springs, so far what we're seeing is that they haven't placed their own stay-at-home order, but they're just following the state's stay-at-home order. However, they are kind of adding to some of those things. What we've noticed for Boulder is that Boulder facilities are going to still remain closed until April 30th, and that we also see that Boulder is potentially imposing harsher penalties than the state order. So under the state order, folks that may violate it could see a fine of up to $999. And here in Boulder, we are seeing that, folks that are violating it could be punished up to a fine of $5,000 and 18 months in jail, or both, which is certainly a concern that we see. And so we'll definitely talk about like what that enforcement measure looks like. But the claim is that they're relying on public education rather than enforcement. And that's kind of the statement that we're seeing with quite a few other jurisdictions. Fort Collins and kind of the Larimer County area have issued their own separate public health order, but they're extending to just the April 26th date. But their order kind of mostly mirrors the state stay-at-home order. And, they are kind of just relying on state statute to impose penalties for violating its order, like treating it like as a misdemeanor or so forth. I think it's important, as I had mentioned before, for Denver, they're not imposing curfews or checking to see, when people are traveling back and forth, what's the reason for their travel. And so I think it's important to make an important note about police impersonators that have been stopping vehicles to inquire about their travel. So far in our research, we haven't seen any jurisdictions that have been creating like checkpoints to stop vehicles and inquire about their travel business. We do know that there were some reports about police impersonators at the beginning of March that were allegedly stopping drivers to inquire about their comings and goings, but we are now learning that quite a few of those reports were actually fabricated. But I think what's important to know is that local law enforcement agencies have repeatedly said that they don't intend to stop drivers to check whether someone is violating the stay-at-home order, and that, just know that in case, you're being stopped and the first thing they ask is where you're going, is to be wary of that. But that doesn't mean that, like, say if you were stopped for a separate traffic infraction, say, running a red light, that in the process of that stop, you may be asked about where, your comings and goings are. But of course, at the ACLU, we always say that you have the right to remain silent in those kind of inquiries. But it does raise some questions as to how local authorities are enforcing these orders. So I think it's important to take a moment for us to kind of discuss that now. So one of the things that are asked is, how long does the state stay-at-home order last? And as we've kind of mentioned before, a CDPHE stay-at-home order will remain in effect until April 26th. The closing of certain businesses, which is under a separate public health order, will remain in effect until April 30th. And then, of course, like Denver stay-at-home order is also remaining in effect until April 30th. And know that, again, based off of the data that we are seeing in terms of the rate and spread of this disease, that jurisdictions in the state have the power to extend, change, replace, or end these orders, given scientific basis that they have to do so. Are these orders mandatory or just guidance? Well, again, since executive departments are given the power to make these orders are mandatory and not just kind of mere suggestions. What are necessary activities under the state stay-at-home order? Well, they can actually are pretty extensive. So necessary activities will be tasks and errands that you need to do to keep yourself, your family, and your household members safe and healthy. So just to name a few, necessary activities is defined under public health order as being getting essential medical care and medicine, getting food and supplies for yourself, your pets, family, household members, caring for a family member or vulnerable person or livestock in a different location. I have aging grandparents who can't always go out when they need to get their food supplies. We don't live with them. I am able to go out and go to the store on their behalf, check on them. That is exempted from the stay-at-home order. Outdoor activities like walking, running. This has saved my family's sanity when it is warm outside for us to be able to walk, but it's also really important that group sports or activities that would break social distancing is not protected under these exemptions. And then also going to work or providing essential products and services for critical businesses or government function. It can be hard to figure out, what is considered essential or critical. And so certainly we encourage folks to look at the order. We have the link here that is pretty extensive to kind of look at that. And then also, kind of what is that necessary travel? It's kind of within the same lines of, necessary travel is providing or accessing necessary activities or going to, if you have to work as an essential person who has to work or part of, just kind of critical business day to day. Receiving materials to promote distance learning. So as we know, DPS has been issuing Chromebooks and food for families during this time. That would be necessary travel that is protected. Also, travel to transport children between separate households. If there's a parenting plan or other agreement governing parental responsibilities, that is protected travel. And then also, if you just happen to be moving to a different place at this time, then you do have the ability to move in to different residences. Also, I think it's really important to note that this also includes individuals who may be at a residence that is unsafe due to domestic violence concerns. And so certainly if you or someone may be in that situation, the stay-at-home orders do permit making some of those changes in residence moves if you need to. And hopefully we have a link at the end of this presentation if you need more information on that. Okay. What are critical businesses under the state stay-at-home order? This, again, kind of goes within the same line if you're looking to access healthcare operations, critical infrastructure, so utilities like water, oil, and gas, electricity. Critical manufacturing includes like food products, computers, medical equipment, paper products, since, toilet paper is hard to find these days. Critical retail, the grocery stores, gas stations, restaurants for takeout and delivery, and then also critical services such as trash and recycling pickup. If you don't have a washer and dryer within your home, then laundromats are a place that provides an essential service. Animal shelters. I think other businesses to note is that this also includes news media, banks, um, providers of necessities for communities that are economically disadvantaged. So folks who are experiencing homelessness can still go to food banks and shelters, and then also constructions of housing, electricians, plumbers, and so forth. Houses of worship is also considered a critical business under the stay-at-home order. So they may remain open. However, these institutions are required to implement, electronic platforms if they can, whenever possible, or to conduct smaller and more frequent services like 10 or fewer congregants in order to comply with those social distancing requirements. And then critical government functions. So these are going to be your fire stations, your first responders, your police officers, public utility facilities, transportation. These are considered necessary activities and services, and therefore functions that folks can access. And again, the full list of this and the exemptions are on the link that we have here, but we'll provide later on our webpage. So one question. The Denver mayor called on the National Guard to assist in the COVID-19 response. Does that mean that we are under martial law? No, that does not mean we are under martial law. So the Colorado National Guard is supporting the logistics, the transportation, and medical response efforts to COVID-19, but they are not enforcing the orders. We know that about more than 250 members of the National Guard are helping state emergency operations in the city and county of Denver to help with kind of sheltering communities who are experiencing homelessness, so that they can put efforts towards creating more shelters, such as like at the National Western Complex, which we're kind of seeing some concerns there, but that is where they're coming in, not to enforce the orders themselves. And it's important to understand what martial law is. Martial law, it often means that ordinary laws are suspended and directs military control over normal civilian functions, especially during a temporary emergency. So it may give military the power to order evacuations or enter areas that normally wouldn't be allowed to enter. It also means giving the military direct power over civilians. That is not what is going on here. That's not the situation that we're in. And then one thing is that the governor's stay-at-home order ends on April 26th, but Denver's order extends to April 30th. Which one should I follow? So any local jurisdiction can put requirements that are more restrictive than the state level executive order, and what's in place kind of stays in place. So if you live in Denver and the order says that the stay-at-home is lifted April 30th, that is the one that would apply. Okay. So one thing we want to talk about is what will happen if I do not comply with the orders. So we see that the state may impose a fine of kind of up to $1,000 and up to a year in county jail. We are seeing where Denver saying that they have the power to issue citations and may impose a civil penalty of $999, and then Boulder is taking it up even a notch by a fine of $5,000 and 18 months of jail, or both. Now, Denver and Boulder are saying that they are relying on public education rather than enforcement, which is what we would definitely rather see. such as for Denver City, a city that's focused on education and providing information. So using city staff, so park rangers, public health officials, to do proactive education versus law enforcement, and having city staff enforcing that by like tracking warnings. You may see them in a marked shirt if you're out and about, but just kind of, really making sure that using law enforcement for public health orders is concerning. And so we rather have city staff educate and enforce public orders than the law enforcement. A public health approach should focus on preventing illness rather than punishing people who are sick. Unfortunately, we know that the reality is that minorities and other socially disadvantaged populations tend to bear the brunt of tough public health measures and laws that equate medicine and public health with law enforcement end up severely kind of undercutting public confidence and are likely to lead people to avoid public health officials rather than seeking them out for help or following guidance. So as long as public health officials are working to help people rather than to punish them, people then are more likely to engage more willingly in the efforts to keep their families and their communities healthy and safe. Certainly what we don't want to see is that non-compliance with stay-at-home orders are introducing folks into the criminal legal system. So as you may be aware, the ACLU and its coalition partners have been sounding the alarm to protect the lives of people who interact with the criminal legal system, inmates, correctional officers and their families, judges, attorneys, the list goes on, to stop the spread of the disease. We know that jails and prisons are these ideal breeding grounds for COVID-19, and that spread within the facilities and out in the community can happen pretty quickly. So we've advocated to district attorney offices to reduce the rate in which people are being arrested by law enforcement and asking public officials with authority to set bail, which includes judges and police officers, to look at releasing people on their own personal recognizance versus setting up bail that they cannot afford to pay and therefore languishing in jail pre-trial. We're also looking to make sure police departments or avoid arresting people for minor offenses and to arrest for all, to avoid arresting for all but the most serious felonies, and that the arrest should only be when the officer is perceiving an immediate threat or safety to other people, and hope that law enforcement should be explicit, like to explicitly prohibit them from making those custodial arrests for those low-level crimes. So we have sent letters to the governor and criminal justice officials raising these issues. While we are seeing, the needle move a little bit to depopulate our jails, more action and advocacy is needed, particularly for our youth who are still housed in juvenile detention facilities. So with that, hopefully we have some community resources that folks can access. Again, this is an hour webinar, so we may not be able to cover all of our bases, but certainly if you would like to learn more information about being in Denver and wanting to know what the specific order looks like for that and resources there, we have the link, as well as for Aurora and Arapahoe County, which also can give some resources from that area's Tri-County Health Department. We also have the link there for resources for Boulder if you want to know more about what's happening in that area, as well as for Colorado Springs and the Fort Collins and Larimer areas, Larimer County area. And again, we will be posting these up on our webpage for folks to access. Statewide, if you're looking to get more information on COVID-19, there's a lot of resources to look up. Certainly, we understand that during this time, internet access, not everyone has the same level of internet access. And so certainly there are also numbers here like Colorado Help and 211 Colorado that you can access from your phone. And they do provide information in languages other than English, Spanish, Mandarin, the list goes on. We also have a few links for if you are experiencing food scarcity. The Food Bank of the Rockies and Meals on Wheels for Seniors can be resources to access if that is something that you are concerned about. Also, if there are employment issues, because we do understand the impact that the pandemic is having on our economy, please visit Department of Labor and Employment if there are some concerns there that you need answers to. As far as medical assistance, there is the Colorado telehealth and nurse lines. And then also Planned Parenthood is still, offering reproductive health care for folks. So please also visit their website if you need access to that reproductive health care. Also, as I mentioned before, if you or someone that you know is experiencing being in a residence that is unsafe, you are permitted to seek help. And so if domestic violence is a concern, please visit Violence Free Colorado's website for more information. Denver Homeless Out Loud, if you are experiencing homelessness, this organization and our coalition partner are really kind of out on the front lines, really kind of assessing how COVID-19 is impacting, how COVID-19 is impacting this community. So please check that out. In terms of immigration, our lovely Anna Tamu, our immigrant campaigns coordinator, put on a fabulous webinar a couple of weeks ago on how COVID-19 is impacting the immigrant community. And so I believe that webinar is now up on our website, but there's also plenty of resources there to check out, as well as Casa de Paz is also a great organization that is providing some resources in terms of impact on the immigrant community. And then too, if you or someone that you know is being impacted by the criminal justice system, the Colorado Freedom Fund is still out there helping to release people from cages for low-level bonds that they cannot afford. And so please also visit their website if you, again, know someone who needs that assistance. Again, the full resource list is available or will be available on our Advocacy at Home webpage. And then also too, again, we understand and recognize that there may be some specific individuals that have some issues or concerns about how these stay-at-home orders are impacting them. So if you think that there is a concern and you need legal help, please visit our website. We are still looking through our intake. There is never a guarantee that we can take every case, but certainly we want to hear from you if there is a concern on that front. So in closing, I think that it's best to acknowledge how quickly information can become old news during this time, and how rapidly things can evolve, which is, kind of requires us to continually to reassess the situation. So we just want folks to know that, regardless of this pandemic, the ACLU's mission still remains the same, and that we will continually work to understand how the pandemic is impacting folks' civil rights and civil liberties and respond appropriately. So with that, I think we can open it up for any questions. Delana will be moderating our questions. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Jess. That was great. I am going to bring Mark on. We'll ask him to start his video up. So right now, we just have a couple of questions, but I do encourage folks to type those questions into the Q&A box. That way we can read them. Our first question is, what is the legality of counties closing county roads to non-county residents? And this apparently is happening in Clear Creek.
Well, I read an article about that, and it certainly raised my eyebrows. I think that this might fall into the category of the arbitrary discrimination against particular subgroups in our Colorado community.
Okay. And then the next one is about a small fishing shop, 800 square feet, was forced to close, but a giant sporting goods store, because they sell guns, gets to stay open. And you know, Mark, I know this, my daughter works at a toy store, and it is just a toy store. So they had to close, but Target, that sells toys, they get to stay open because they sell food too. So I don't know if there's any.
We have to acknowledge that there is an absolutely compelling government interest in minimizing the degree to which people are interacting because of the risk of spreading the virus. But when we say that these really draconian measures have to be as narrowly and carefully tailored as possible for furthering the goal while staying true to the science, you have to wonder if there aren't going to be aberrations at the edges of these orders. And I actually don't see why the small fly fishing shop, if they practice social distancing, has to remain closed. If the people that are going to go to the fly fishing shop are also practicing social distancing. But if we had several million people all out shopping and patronizing businesses that profess to be carrying on the social distancing, I imagine we would have much more spread of the virus.
So probably better safe than sorry in this case. Our next question, is there a state mandated order to prevent renters from eviction for a limited period of time during the pandemic?
I'm not aware of a state mandated order. I did learn today that the statute that Congress passed, that they're calling the CARES Act, actually prohibited evictions in federally funded or federally subsidized housing. And I think it was a rather broad definition of federally assisted housing. Perhaps it also includes housing where there's federally involved loans. But I also read that there is not a good enforcement mechanism in the statute. So ProPublica, this is where I read the story, ProPublica was making calls to some of these big rental companies that were already ordering evictions. And just ProPublica's inquiries managed to stop some evictions because these companies didn't even know that the new statute had prohibited the evictions. But as for a state order, I don't think we have that yet.
Okay. And then next says, Dallas, Texas issued an order requiring all persons over the age of 2 to wear masks when patronizing essential businesses during this time. Could we anticipate seeing something like this in Colorado?
Well, I tell you, one of the things that broke down was my crystal ball, and I'm having trouble really seeing what might be coming next. I'll have to say, I've been surprised by some of the things that have already come down the pike.
Yes, we need to get that crystal ball fixed.
Well, the repair shop had to close, unfortunately.
Not an essential business. Okay, that's our little comedy routine for the night. And last question is, and this is a serious question, the COVID-19 virus is spreading with the unhoused neighbors. in the city of Denver and the state of Colorado? What are both entities doing to keep the virus from spreading?
Well, if you're talking about our unhoused neighbors, what is Denver and the state of Colorado doing?
Mm-hmm.
The answer is not enough. Both the state and Denver have the ability to be renting unused hotel rooms, to be getting leases with unused housing. They could help take people off the streets and get them sheltered in a way that allows them to practice the same physical distancing that's recommended for the rest of the population.
Yes, and this is something we are watching very closely, as is our partners in the homeless advocacy community. Oh, we got another question. It says, in Fremont County, the Department of Parks and Wildlife has posted no camping signs on BLM land. Is this legal?
Not sure if the Bureau of Land Management is federal, and is the question about whether the state agency has the authority to post no camping on federal land. I actually don't know. It does seem like the state wouldn't have authority to do that unless they're posting those signs with the consent or knowledge of the federal authorities.
Okay. All right. So far, that's all our questions. Mark, did you have anything you wanted to add to the presentation?
I don't think I do. I want to thank Jess for the work that she put into preparing this today.
Yes, she put a lot of work into it, and it was absolutely wonderful. We will get all the resources up on our website as soon as possible. And please, join us next Thursday night, where we will be talking about voting rights during COVID-19. And you'll be surprised to know that Colorado is actually doing better than a lot of other states. So with that, and I don't see any more questions, we're going to go ahead and close out tonight. And thank you so much, Mark and Jessica, for all the work that you put into this, and Mark for being with us tonight. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we hope to see you next Thursday.
All right. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.